very grateful to you for your time.
You're welcome.
As I said to you earlier on, this is an eclectic mix of questions from people who regularly contribute and read to Labour Home and to my own weblog. So I apologise also about some of the names. Some of them are real names,
and some are not.
Pseudonym.
I promise not to go after anybody.
Good. Okay.
So we're all right there.
So I'll start with some nice questions to start with. This is from Big Pete, whoever Big Pete is. Big Pete wants to know, which opposition MP do you most respect and why?
Well, there are 2 or 3 people who I actually rate, which is not quite the same thing, Pete. I mean, I rate William Hague, although I thought that when he was trying to argue for an inquiry that he didn't actually believe in and a resolution that he was against, it sort of knocked the shine off it a bit. But there are people like Malcolm Rifkin who actually have stood out against the pressures of the media to call for things, including a year ago for my resignation, for which I've been very grateful. And I've had some respect in the past for ex-MPs. This will come as something of a surprise and a shock and will sort of make people grimace, but I thought Patillo was actually quite a good minister, and he was highly respected in the department when I took over in 1997, because I was Education and Employment Secretary and he'd been Employment Secretary. And he'd been extremely nice to his staff, he'd been very motivational, he'd showed some leadership. Whether you like him or not, and I certainly don't like his politics, you have to respect a guy for that.
Okay. I hope that satisfies Big Pete.
It might irritate Big Pete.
It might be, well, I'll look,
anyway, sorry Big Pete.
Look forward to the correspondence.
Very good.
Scotty, what's been your proudest achievement in government and why?
Again, if the people viewing, tapping in will forgive me, I'll just say 2 or 3 things. Just the things I did over 9 years were very different. I mean, actually being able to move quickly, proportionally, sensibly in dealing with counter-terrorism post-11 September has to be the most difficult but the most challenging thing that I did. The most satisfying was obviously in education, the literacy and numeracy programme, the transformation of the life chances of kids in school and college was, and probably one of those seminal moments was the day we got unemployment below 1 million. I mean, as one of my advisors said to me on that day, 6 years ago, this is what I came into the Labour Party to achieve.
Okay. I'll come back to the education one later, if that's all right. Ian G, I told you about these questions, some nice...
No, I'm going to get mixed.
Ian G, he says, why are you doing so much damage to the Labour Party, which you claim to support, and how can you possibly justify taking money from the Daily Mail?
Well, I'll take the second one first. My agent did a deal with The Guardian, who did a deal with the Daily Mail. I think you take the rough and the smooth. The Mail have done me enormous damage, so taking something back from them is, in my view, poetic justice. But the idea that I should have said to The Guardian, terribly sorry, I'll go to the Telegraph group instead, would be bizarre. So, sorry about that. I know it's irritated people. It irritated me because they chose some of the extracts in such a bizarre way that the headlines distorted what's in the diary. If you mean, have I damaged the Labour Party through the diary? Well, I take one person who's never been a great complimenter of myself, Roy Lord Hattersley, and someone who I count as a friend, Tony Blair, and both of them have said over the last few weeks that the diary, because they've both read it, does not damage the Labour Party or the Labour government, and it doesn't.
Okay. Red Tamarin, who I think Alex you may know well. I think you've answered part of this question, Dave, about what prompted you to publish your diaries at this time. And would you agree that publishing your diaries at the time that you did, whether you had control of that or not, will have an impact on the leadership and the deputy leadership content?
On the second, no, I don't think it will have any impact whatsoever. It might strengthen people's view of the individuals who are running, but if people actually read the diary as opposed to the headlines, I think they'll find that there's an enormous balanced view. And some people I've been critical of in the past, I say in italics because I put in italics what I think subsequently, as opposed to rewriting the history of it. I say I was unfair to them, so I try and actually make sure that if I've changed my view, it's very clearly reflected there. I publish now because with 3 years off a general election, we intend to win the general election. I wasn't entirely sure when I was ever going to be able to publish the diary if I didn't do it now. Because the difference between my diary and, say, Robin Cook's book or Momoa's, both people I knew very closely and respected very highly, was probably the publicity my diary got. I mean, they both published before the general election. They both sadly died since, which is a lesson for all of us. Harold Wilson published his reflections on government between his two spells in office, which was a good job, because of course then he got Alzheimer's disease and he wouldn't have been able to do it. I hope not to go down either of those routes, but I do think there are lessons.
We agree with that. Liz, interesting question this, and if I can get my head around it, it may take you some minutes. How can I believe your diary was not doctored when Mr. Neri stated that he had not taken up a position mentioned in the diary at the time of the Lincoln prison riot?
Well, in the diary itself, it reflects the fact that he wasn't in Lincoln, and he was on the Isle of Wight, and he travelled to Lincoln during the night and early the following morning. The only difference between Martin Neri and myself is that I didn't pay him sufficient compliment, and when he looked through the index, which he openly says he did in a bookshop again actually in the Isle of Wight, funnily enough, discovered I hadn't paid a compliment to him and got very irritated. The difference between us is he is right in saying that I said that I would call in the army if they didn't retake the prison, because the prison had been taken by the prisoners. By the following morning, given Sky and News 24 would have covered it extensively, and the riots at Strangeways 17 years earlier would have looked like chicken feed. But I didn't actually suggest that we should machine gun anyone. It's a good embellishment, and he almost convinced me when I heard it on Radio 4 that I'd said it. So I have said in my little column that I wrote on a Wednesday, sorry Martin, I really didn't pay you enough of a compliment for what in the end was a successful retake.
David Floyd wants to know, David, if you could hold any current position in the cabinet, which one would it be?
Well, David, if you'll forgive me for not answering it in a way that ends up with a story that I'm bidding for somebody's job, which I am not, can I just reflect on the one I really got the most out of? I mean, the Home Secretary was the most important. I had no desire whatsoever to go back to that. It was a killer, and it nearly finished me off. But I loved doing the education job. I mean, going into schools and colleges, working with young people, the adrenaline was running, and it was like plugging into electricity. You came out of a school feeling that it was all worthwhile. So I'm not bidding to have Alan Johnson's job. I'm just reflecting that I love that best of all.
Okay, thank you for being so honest about that. Harry Perkins, he says you were once a staunch advocate of unilateral nuclear disarmament. Have you now abandoned this commitment?
Well, I haven't pronounced on it, and I'm reflecting on the best way of joining in on the debate about the replacement of Trident. And when I'm ready to do that, I shall say something which I hope will be helpful in terms of finding a way forward. At the moment, I've no intention of doing that because, again, I haven't talked to my constituency party in depth. We're going to have a proper debate over the months ahead, and I hope other constituency parties and trade union branches will, because I think it's really important that we get this right.
Okay. Decimus Juvenalis.
Yeah.
He says he was a civil servant when you came into office, and he said he witnessed the chaos as the Whitehall machine came to terms with serving a blind minister. His question is, as a result of your experiences, do you think that Whitehall is better prepared to support a Minister of State with a disability?
Yes, I do. It was a learning curve for all of us. I mean, for them it was practical. How do you get material onto tape? How do you get the Braille machine to work on the software? We added the incident that's in the diary, which is true, which is that I took a brief across to Downing Street and discovered that the Braille was in Swedish because the machine had not been switched to the English version. So
how is it Swedish?
We're not terribly good. It's like sort of running the tape backwards. If Swedish people will forgive me. It was difficult, but actually people did rise to it. I mean, they were very good, and we in the end had a system which got people to produce much shorter papers, because I used to say to people, well, you read it on, and when they had to read verbiage that was coming out, the reams and reams of trees that had been cut down to produce it, got people to be a little bit more circumspect. So that was good.
James Noakes, do you look back at the raising of the red flag over Sheffield Town Hall with pride or embarrassment?
Neither really. Sort of eyebrows lifted, thinking, God, that was so long ago, 26 years ago. I inherited the fervour of the policy. My poor office staff were beaten about by old ladies' umbrellas who came in to berate us because they thought that the Russians had invaded Sheffield. And I think we decided that actually doing things well and changing the life chances of people in the city was a lot better way of demonstrating our commitment to socialism than raising the red flag. So we were learning.
It's a great mental picture I've got of these ladies assaulting the town hall. Aaron Heath, who runs a weblog of his own, Tigerland, Aaron says, do you think that Mr Blair's sofa government approach contributed to a general lack of self-discipline in Cabinet? And how do you see this style evolving in the future?
Well, I said on the Channel 4 programmes, and I reflect in the diary, that I think that we managed in the end to get a balance. You see, if you look back at previous governments, including the Labour governments of the 1960s and 70s, the cabinet meetings were bizarre. They used to debate things like the boiler hen quota from Denmark. They used to have 2 or 3 rambling cabinet meetings a week in which people wandered in and out. There was no discipline in terms of what decision do we have to take, how do we get there. And so there was naturally a reaction to that. And we probably did see informal meetings and subcommittees of cabinet dealing with things that were better dealt with more formally, with more detailed minutes taken. And we started to revert back to that with what were called stock takes,
yes,
where the Prime Minister would actually pull the relevant ministers, civil servants and outsiders together and actually get people to address the decision. And I think we've just about gotten to a point now where we've reverted back to something more formal, but not the absurdity of the 1960s and 70s.
Okay. David, so we've come back to education. A question from Margaret Tulloch, and it's a question that I'm interested in your answer to. Clearly now there is consensus across all political parties that selection at the age of 11 is not good for children. It's not good for promoting social inclusion. Do you agree with that? And do you have any regrets that whilst you were in office, perhaps we didn't end selection at 11?
Firstly, I do agree with it, and secondly, yes, I do have regrets. I have regrets that we made the hurdle as high as we did for those seeking a ballot in order to legitimise the removal of the 11 plus in places like Trafford or Kent or Buckinghamshire. We did it for a very good reason, that we didn't want to be diverted once again into status and structures away from what was our mantra and a correct mantra of standards. And had we been diverted, the whole of the Labour education policy from 97 would have been seen as a battle with local parents in Trafford and Kent. And I just couldn't, I mean, I agree with the Prime Minister, we just couldn't do that if we were going to carry through the 1998 Standards and Framework Act, which we did, in the transformation that we're now seeing. I mean, the truth is that my hope then, and it still is, although it's taking longer, was that if we got so many youngsters at 11 to level 4 and level 5 to the standard that is acceptable, then the 11 plus would become such an anachronism that it would be difficult for authorities like Kent to deal with it, because there would be so many children who quite legitimately had reached the stage where if they wanted to, they would go to grammar school.
Do you see it as unfinished business?
Yes, I do. But I do think that sometimes, which makes me a bit of a Fabian, that gradualism can be better than some big bang that ends up with a terrific row. And after all, we do have to win people over to it. And as I say, I think the hurdle was pretty high, but we weren't able to demonstrate that there was a great fervour in those authorities for doing away with selection, sadly.
Okay. Just the recent debate about quotas. Do you think Alan Johnson has made the right decision to move away from that?
Well, I'd say that, forgive me for referring to the diaries, but I say that bishops and the judiciary are the best politicians I ever met, and the bishops have done it again. Really, they've been able to manoeuvre to deal with the political arena in a very expert fashion, and I don't think in the end he had very much choice given the antagonism that had been created. I think the problem is not actually about new created schools, it's about getting greater diversity in the existing schools where you end up with all sorts of mono ethnic, racial and religious backgrounds.
Okay, thank you for that. Angela wants to know, should the next deputy leader of the Labour Party be a woman?
I think that would be the case if the best person putting their names forward was a woman. I think people should be elected on merit. I think we should take every possible step to ensure that the obstacles that have been in the way of women over the years are removed. I was proud to have the largest number of women in my ministerial team of anybody past or present. There were five women. There was me and one man, Paul Goggins. It was called Mrs. Goggins by everybody in the department. And they were there entirely on merit, because they weren't there because they were women.
Okay. Have you formed an opinion yet as to who you will back for the deputy leadership? Is that
no,
in your own mind?
I will make an announcement if it helps the candidate. If they don't want me to, I won't. In the new year, when people have read the diaries and things have calmed down, I think it might be helpful.
Is there a danger you become the Lembit Opic of the...
I would not wish that for the world, not least because I wouldn't wish it on the candidate, because for those who don't remember, he backed the guy who subsequently ran into some personal problems.
So can I clarify, there is a specific candidate that you're committed to?
Well, I haven't. The difficulty we've got at the moment is that we haven't seen the full list, because there are still people who are thinking over the next few weeks about declaring. I think by the new year people will have to have decided whether they're declaring, because otherwise they'll have lost out, because other people will have built up sufficient support, and I don't think anybody wants what happened to David Davis, which is everybody's going to support you and then suddenly nobody's supporting you.
Martin X wants to know, when was the last time you had a one-to-one with John Prescott, and has your relationship...
Does he mean in the ring? Or?
And has your relationship improved in recent weeks and months?
No, it's a very long time since John and I spoke to each other. I hold no brief against John. I don't attack him in the book. I merely point out that when he was attacking me, there were reasons why it would have been better if he'd been circumspect.
Final question, David. Given the difficult time you've had personally and politically, and the diaries have I guess been cathartic in one sense, because it's allowed you to set the record straight. Do you think, given all that, in time you would either want to return to the cabinet or feel that you would be welcomed by a future leader to come back to the cabinet?
Well, I do try and answer questions. I mean, the honest truth is I don't know. All I knew was that in the year that's passed, I had to direct myself to getting down on paper my reflections of what had happened accurately, my current thinking, and I had to get that out of the way. I did so because it's therapeutic to me, but also because I think it does tell a story that's worth hearing. And in the new year, I've got to decide as an individual where my future lies. I want to stay in Parliament. My constituents have been wonderful to me, absolutely wonderful. Not unconditional. Not unconditional in the sense that they're not critical, because they are, and we have good arguments, but unconditional support whenever I've needed it, and you can't ask for more than that. That is mutuality, interdependence, and what we call socialism, and we don't always actually practice it.
David Blunkett, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.